Yeah, I know that one. Yeah, I know that one.
What do you think? Should we rally everybody? Are you...
I want to thank everybody for coming all this way on a Sunday to honor my friend Jeff Lewis, who's been a great friend and sort of spirit guide through my life, and I'm sure many of yours. And Jeff has written in the last 15 years some unbelievable novels. The Meritocracy Quartet, which was a sort of story of his generation and to a lesser degree mine, but he's now written this sort of standalone piece about Maine, and we tried to have a somewhat Maine theme here tonight, but you wouldn't know it since all it is the pea soup, and we were going to have a fire, we didn't get that going. Anyway, Jeff's going to read a little bit, and we'll see.
Thanks, Jacob. And also, if those of you who are enjoying the wonderful desserts in the other room, special thanks to Susie Norris, who I can now plug by saying her book called The Baker's Passport is actually being published in about 3 days. And if you want to, and if you want to know how to bake those things, Susie will be able to tell you. This book is set in Maine, in a community on the coast that is fairly typical of many, in that a fairly traditional working class community sits side by side with an affluent summer colony, and really that juxtaposition animates the book and hopefully makes it reflect a bunch of stuff that, excuse me, I'm losing my voice already, going on in the country right now. I think I'll read 2 short chapters. All the chapters in this book are short, but there are a lot of them. I'll read the first chapter, which introduces maybe the most central character in the book, if not that one of them, Gary Hutchins, and the community. The demolition derby at night in Bealport. The cars grunted and clashed. They could seem as stubborn as their drivers. Radiators burst, engines caught fire, grills and fenders dragged in the dirt. The earth was scorched and scored, the air smelled of sulfur and gas. It was a contest of rage, played in a haze of smoke and dust, under an ancient stand of lights that occasionally caught flashes of steel and blood. In the summer, it was something to do, to go out to the old fairgrounds and sip canned beer and watch Gary Hutchins demolish the rest. That was anyway the crowd's expectation, based on the years that Gary's Lincoln had survived, while the Oldsmobiles and Chryslers and Chevys of all the others had been done to scrap. First prize was $500. You could keep a car on the road for $500. Gary didn't win every derby, but even when he was the second or third car left, there was enough of the Lincoln that he could weld and tinker and coddle and put a fresh set of ball tires on and be back for the next one. It was a '77 Continental, a roadside attraction bought where it sat on a front yard in Orrington, with 2 tons of steel in it, and said by Burton Miles and certain others of Gary's competitors, as well as much of the grandstand crowd, to be the best car the Derby had seen. Though it's possible that those who said so were diminishing the man by praising the machine. Gary was up to his usual tricks this night, positioning the Lincoln at the farthest edge of the pit, then sitting there as best he was able while the others bashed each other apart until there were only 2 remaining. It was hardly a new tactic, and the others could try to pull it off, but they never outweighted Gary. They were too easily tempted or too hungry for the fight. It was almost as if Gary didn't like to fight. If someone came after him, he would fend them off, the Lincoln's wide trunk blocking and shoving, or if they came at him with speed, he would dodge. Then when the field was down to its wounded stragglers, he became like an animal pawing the ground. The crowd sat under the stand of lights grew expectant. This was Gary's game now. This was his pleasure. The big guy in the big car clearing his engine's throat and popping the clutch so the grass and mud spit under him. And from this farthest edge, so that the greatest acceleration could be had, he sped in reverse at Pete Hammond's caprice. Hobbled by 3 flat tires, Hammond had nowhere to go. He oversteered and dragged himself, but the fat trunk of the Lincoln caught his front end at a certain angle and plowed through to the radiator. A wheel fell off the caprice. It wasn't the engine flames or the geysering water that got Petey, but the lost wheel. When Gary pulled off, his own crumpled trunk stuck up in the air. It was the end of the night, unexpected and fast. Harv Furman's caddy should have still been in it, but his gas tank exploded, and the fire guys ran out to pour retardant on. Gary got to stand by the chain link in front of the pit and collect his $500 check from Excelsior Sports down from Bangor that ran these events. He was a big man with curly hair and a black t-shirt that was sweated through. No helmet had messed up his curls. The weak lights from the single pole left shadows on him so that what was left could seem, if you weren't too fussy about it, like shards of glory. So that was the first chapter. I'll skip several chapters now and go on to...
And let me just interrupt for a second. And Jeff's book has been published in England, and there have been some amazing reviews of it. This is what somebody thought of what you just heard. Comparisons between Jeffrey Lewis's deft, bittersweet portrait of a Maine community and Thornton Wilder's 1938 stage classic Our Town are inevitable. Both vividly evoke the interwoven lives of individuals with an easy down-home style that masks something larger and darker. In Wilder's case, it's the inevitability of death. In Lewis's, it's the destructive force of greed. A hugely satisfying read.
One character is alluded to and one is talked about here, who are main characters in the book. Roger Kiesinger is kind of the straw that stirs the drink, as Robert Ward might say. The guy who's moved into the island, the summer colony, and has bought up the local shoe factory. Then there's Gary's brother, Billy Hutchins, who was younger than Gary, grew up in Bealport, got in trouble half the time, went out to California, did whatever he did out there, which nobody in Bealport really knows about, and has recently come back. But because the last time he was in Bealport, he got into some difficulties, he hasn't been able to get a job back at the shoe factory and has taken a job cutting grass at some of the rich people's lawns. In the shade of young girls in flower, there were 3 girls and 2 boys. Kiesinger was in love with the idea of big families, of the way families used to be. What better thing to spend your money on if you had it? And it kept the race alive too, though that was something you had to take care in the way you said it so that it wouldn't be taken the wrong way. Just look at the beautiful children. They were answer enough. Eliza, Hamilton, Teresa, George, Mary. How blonde were they? Credit Courtney with that one. If it had been up to Kiesinger's genes, they wouldn't have been blonde at all. And then there was George, who was as red-headed as an Irishman. They dotted the lawns and docks and sailboats of the island like ornaments of success and luck. And there was enough of them, and they were close enough to each other that around them the other children of the island gathered as if to the nucleus of youth itself. How different in every conceivable human way they were from Billy Hutchins. Of course, philosophically, that was a statement one could easily take issue with. But Billy was not a philosophical thinker. His mind bent decidedly more towards the tactical. And anyway, it wasn't an opinion he expressed, but rather what he felt down to the root of his being as he cut the grass at the Kiesinger place. The girls were playing croquet with their friends. He didn't know any of their names. They sent each other's balls and shouted outraged insults at each other and said this was cheating and that was, and with all of it they didn't mean a word. And their not caringness was something that Billy had never known in his life, as if it came with the expansive lawn, and if you didn't have the expansive lawn, then you would always care too much. Billy, of course, had the expansive lawn to the degree that he sat on the mower and was cutting it. It was his lawn the way in a large department store the salesman will say whatever he's selling is his. He tried to stay out of the way of their game. The one he noticed most was in the black bathing suit. He noticed them all, and together they were like a planetary system, with features like their clothes and their heights and their common laughter and their obscure rules that must govern their behavior. But if that was so, then the sun and the moon were this girl in the black one-piece. Not that Billy could know that he was being so fancy with himself, but it was as if his yearning knew things that he didn't, other languages, instincts, secrets. It was a big lawn between the Kiesinger house and the water, and there was a lot to cut besides where they were playing their game, until it came down to the point where there wasn't. With the nonchalance afforded by invisibility, he had watched the girl in the black suit bend over wickets in concentration and grab her sunny hair with both her hands and throw it back, and widen her eyes with dismay, touching her face at the same time, and other things, other moments, that were already piling up in his mind as if she were the only person left in the world, having crowded everyone else out, excepting only her playmates, who were there because she was there. Or, that was the way to look at it. The other way was that he loved all these girls. It was the sum of them, the sun and the moon and the planets, that he desired and could not touch. How old were they really? That thought crossed his mind. 16, 17. Old enough, the satyr in him said. And then there was nothing to do but to ask them to move. He could see it, they could see it. If they didn't move, then where they were playing, the grass would remain too long. Jobs had their logic. Though Billy didn't want to ask them to move because he didn't want them to see him in an inferior position, he imagined his groaning, beating mower as a tank on which he could be riding in to liberate them. Or why wasn't the girl in black in trouble in the water off the dock, flailing around or caught by a stray shark, such as the bay had never seen, so that he could be off his mower in a flash and in the water, etc., and so forth, you might say, or even Billy might say. Billy, his almost James Dean expression. Excuse me, sorry. Eliza, the girl in the back black one-piece. Oh, sorry, we'll just pick up everything. Billy, not to bother, I can get around those things. Eliza, the wickets? Billy, embarrassed for not knowing the word. Yeah, the wickets. Right, take 5 minutes, just leave them. Eliza, we can do it, it'll be easier. Billy hadn't expected that she would be thinking to make something easier for him. It showed that everything he had thought was true. This was where the life beyond him began and his own ended. The one in the black suit, Eliza, who in fact was 17, began to pick up wickets and the others followed, so that they looked like birds eating crumbs that someone had scattered in the grass. Billy felt a moment's power, as if he had gotten them to do something they didn't really want to do. Yet they didn't seem to mind. For them, it could be one thing or another, do this or not, do that or not, in the perfect summer afternoon. The thought of work or of the time for play being limited had no place in the world they lived in, and that for a few moments he was given to observe. Screw all of them, he thought. Screw all of them, that would be nice. But the one in the black suit last. Then banished the thought, so that it wasn't in his eyes, though there might have been a moment when it was. And if they had seen? They were done now. The rest of the lawn was his for the mowing. Perhaps he could persuade them to admire his machine. They stood aside and he went through the last unmowed patch very professionally. One hand on the wheel, how corny was that? When he was done, he gave them a little salute and they waved. One of the girls said thanks, and Billy said, I'll be back next week. He drove the mower off around the grand white clapboard house and all its flowering bushes to the long gravel drive to put the mower on his new employer, Matt Farnsworth's old beaten-down Silverado, Matt Farnsworth's third best truck. Whether any of the girls gave him another thought, who could say? Well, I'll stop there.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a couple more thanks, actually. I think I thank Jacob and Susie for this wonderful party. But in addition, there are two people here today who actually blurbed this book. And I'm really, really grateful. And they are Robert Ward, sitting right here, and David Milch, who I think is sitting on one of the steps over there. I'm really grateful to both of you, who are both dear friends and Anyway, it's great.
It's a great book.
So, again, thanks all for coming. It's great to see so many people.
Great.